In the sweltering heat of 1853, a young plantation daughter made a decision that would shock her entire world. Defying the rigid boundaries of Southern society, she ran north, not alone, but with one of her father's slaves. Their flight was fueled by a mix of forbidden love, desperation, and the hope for a life free from oppression. For 6 months they vanished into the shadows of a nation deeply divided, pursued by relentless hunters and haunted by the dangers of a society unwilling to forgive such rebellion. But what awaited them at the end of this harrowing journey would turn their story into a legend, an outcome no one could have imagined. In the blistering summer of 1853, the air over the sprawling plantation was thick with the smell of wet earth, sweet grass, and the distant smoke from the kitchens and the fields. It was a world where everything had its place, a rigid hierarchy that dictated every movement, every glance, every whispered word. At the heart of this world lived the plantation daughter, a young woman who had grown up surrounded by wealth, luxury, and a strict sense of duty. She moved gracefully through the halls of the grand mansion, her skirts rustling softly against polished floors, her hair glinting in the golden sunlight streaming through tall windows. But beneath this outward appearance of refinement and obedience, a storm was brewing, a tempest of emotions and desires that could no longer be contained. From a young age she had observed the lives of those who labored beneath her, not with idle curiosity but with an intensity that was rare for someone of her standing. Among the enslaved workers there was one who captured her attention unlike any other, a young man whose quiet strength and sharp intellect set him apart. He was her father's property, bound by chains she could not see but whose weight she felt in her conscience every day. His hands, calloused from endless labor, told a story of hardship and resilience. His eyes, dark and expressive, seemed to look past the surface of her life into the deeper, unspoken truths of the world they both inhabited. The tension between them grew quietly at first, an almost imperceptible current beneath the surface of their daily interactions. She would find excuses to be near him, lingering in the fields under the guise of casual visits, or seeking him out in the shadows of the storage barn. He in turn responded with a cautious warmth, aware of the dangers that even a fleeting moment of connection could bring. Their exchanges were measured, careful, filled with unspoken questions and silent acknowledgments of the impossibility of what they felt. Yet despite the ever-present threat of discovery, the bond between them deepened. As spring melted into summer, the heat seemed to intensify not only the labor in the fields but also the emotions that had been quietly simmering for years. She began to recognize that the life expected of her, the rigid adherence to her father's rules, the social engagements, the endless maintenance of appearances, was suffocating. Every command from her father felt like a chain, every glance from the overseer a reminder of the constraints she lived under. The young man's presence, conversely, was liberating, a small spark of possibility in a world designed to suppress hope. One afternoon, while the sun hung high and merciless over the plantation, she found herself in a secluded grove at the edge of the fields, away from prying eyes. The young man had followed, as he often did when he could find the rare moments of privacy. They spoke in whispers, their words trembling with the weight of their secret. He told her of the dreams he had, of freedom that seemed as distant as the stars, and she shared her own longing for escape, for a life beyond the boundaries of the plantation. The conversation was intense, charged with the electricity of forbidden desire and the gravity of impossible choices. The idea of leaving first entered as a fleeting thought, a whisper of rebellion that could be dismissed as a dream. But with each passing day, as the oppressive heat bore down and the eyes of the plantation grew ever more watchful, the thought became more tangible, more urgent. They began to plan in secret, speaking in coded phrases, marking the days on hidden scraps of paper, imagining a future where they could move freely without fear. Every glance exchanged across a crowded room, every brief touch in the fields became a rehearsal for the moment they would finally break free. Yet the risk was enormous. Her father was known for his strict enforcement of rules and harsh punishments for any perceived transgression. He valued control above all else, and the thought of a runaway daughter and slave was unthinkable to him. The young man's fate was equally precarious. Discovery could mean torture, imprisonment, or death. Every moment together was shadowed by fear, a constant reminder of the stakes at play. And still the pull between them was irresistible, stronger than the threat of punishment, more compelling than the security of the life she had always known. The night before their planned departure, the plantation was quiet, the usual clamor of activity replaced by an eerie stillness. She lay in her room staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft creaks of the mansion settling in the heat. Her heart pounded with anticipation and dread, each beat a reminder of the irreversible choice she was about to make. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of freedom and the unknown. The young man approached the house under the cover of darkness, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had long known the dangers of visibility. Their meeting was brief, words few but heavy with meaning, a silent acknowledgement that the moment had come. When they finally slipped away from the plantation, the world seemed simultaneously vast and confined. The familiar landscape of fields and fences faded behind them, replaced by the uncertainty of open roads, dense forests, and the ever-present threat of capture. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, the cry of a night bird carried the potential for disaster, yet also a strange exhilaration. They moved quickly, guided by the stars, relying on intuition, courage, and an unspoken understanding between them. As dawn broke, painting the horizon with pale pinks and golds, they paused briefly to catch their breath and take in the first glimmers of freedom. The plantation, with its oppressive order and unyielding rules, was now behind them, a place that existed only in memory. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and possibility, but also the intoxicating promise of autonomy, the chance to define their own destinies beyond the rigid confines of a world built on ownership and inequality. In that moment, the plantation daughter and her father's slave stepped fully into a life they would shape together, a life that would test their courage, their love, and the very limits of human endurance. The departure of the plantation daughter and her father's slave did not go unnoticed for long. When morning broke over the plantation, the absence of the young woman was immediately felt, a silence that seemed louder than the usual bustle of servants and laborers. Her chambers, usually immaculate and filled with the faint scent of her perfumed lotions, were untouched, the bed neatly made but untouched by the restless energy of the night. Her father, a stern man whose reputation for strict control and unyielding authority was known across the county, immediately sensed that something was wrong. The air of suspicion settled over the household like a thick fog, and the overseers, men accustomed to enforcing discipline, were summoned to investigate. Whispers began to circulate among the workers, subtle at first, then louder, growing into a torrent of speculation. Some believed she had simply wandered off, caught in some youthful whim or secret romance, while others feared something far more scandalous. The young man, whose presence had always been carefully monitored, was also missing. His absence was a shock, but for the workers who had known him, it seemed almost inevitable, a quiet rebellion against the chains that had bound him for so long. Yet for the family and overseers, it was a scandal of unimaginable proportions. The father's rage was immediate and he stormed through the halls, barking orders, questioning every servant and laborer, his face red with fury and disbelief. To him, the idea that his daughter could defy him, to run away with a slave he owned, was an insult beyond measure, a challenge to the very authority he had cultivated for decades. He demanded answers, threatened punishment, and swore that whoever was responsible for aiding their escape would pay dearly. The overseers were put on high alert, instructed to search every acre of the plantation, to question neighbors and travelers, and to send word to local authority. The chase had begun, a hunt that would stretch across counties and forests, driven by the determination to restore order and exact vengeance. Meanwhile, the broader community reacted with a mixture of shock, gossip, and indignation. The plantation was a symbol of stability and social hierarchy, a microcosm of the larger societal order that governed every aspect of life in the South. The news of a runaway daughter and a slave who had vanished together was incendiary, challenging norms, igniting debates, and stirring fear. Families speculated about the motives behind the flight, some dismissing it as foolish infatuation, others recognizing the courage required to defy such entrenched authority. Rumors spread quickly, exaggerated with each retelling that the young woman had bribed her companion's escape, that they had crossed state lines, that they were being aided by abolitionist networks hidden in the shadows of towns and forests. The pursuit was relentless. Men mounted on horseback scoured the surrounding areas, scanning forests, riversides, and country roads for any sign of the fugitives. Notices were sent to neighboring plantations, towns, and law enforcement, describing the pair in detail, offering rewards for information leading to their capture. The slave catchers, experienced in tracking and subduing those who had escaped bondage, joined the hunt, moving with methodical precision, using knowledge of the terrain, informants, and a network of agents who operated with a combination of fear and loyalty to the prevailing social order. Every step of the fugitives' journey was anticipated, every potential hiding place monitored, making their flight a high-stakes gamble against those who had nothing to lose in their pursuit. For the runaway pair, the intensity of the chase was immediate and constant. Each sound in the night, a snapping twig, the distant clatter of hooves, the murmur of voices, set their hearts racing. They had to move swiftly, silently, and with careful planning, relying on instinct and the few secretive contacts who might aid them without drawing attention. Forests, swamps, and abandoned homesteads became temporary shelters, providing both refuge and danger. Hunger, fatigue, and the harsh elements tested them daily, yet each obstacle strengthened their resolve. They began to understand the depths of each other's character, the courage it took to step into the unknown, the resilience required to persist despite fear and uncertainty. Letters and messages played a role in their escape. Small discreet notes passed between trusted allies or hidden in supply caches gave instructions, encouragement and updates on the movements of those in pursuit. Each written word carried immense weight, a lifeline connecting them to a network that operated in secrecy. The Underground Railroad, though in its infancy in some regions, had already established connections through sympathetic families, freedmen, and abolitionist sympathizers willing to risk everything to aid escapees. These clandestine channels became the scaffolding of their journey, each contact a carefully calculated risk, each movement planned to avoid the traps set by the determined hunters behind them. Meanwhile, the plantation itself felt the absence acutely. The young woman's disappearance left a void that could not be ignored. Rooms remained silent, the rhythm of daily life disrupted, and the authority of her father undermined. The workers whispered among themselves, some expressing admiration for her bravery, others fearing the repercussions of her defiance. The young man's absence, equally noticeable, left the laborers in tension, aware that the consequences of being associated with the escape could be dire. This mix of fear, intrigue and subtle support created a tense atmosphere that lingered long after the initial shock, a reminder of the delicate balance of control and rebellion in a society built on ownership and hierarchy. As the days turned into weeks, the urgency of the pursuit did not diminish. Posters and flyers, carefully illustrated with descriptions and supposed sightings, appeared along roads and every rumor was chased, every lead investigated, yet the fugitives seemed to vanish, leaving only traces in the landscape, a broken branch, footprints near a stream, a fleeting shadow glimpsed at dusk. The community's frustration grew, intensifying the manhunt, while the fugitives adapted, learning to anticipate the strategies of those who sought them, becoming increasingly resourceful and cautious with each passing day. Despite the ever-present threat, moments of human connection and tenderness persisted. The young woman and her companion shared fleeting instances of rest and conversation, speaking of dreams and fears, of a future that might never be guaranteed. They learned to trust each other absolutely, relying on intuition and the unspoken bond forged through adversity. These quiet moments, though brief and fragile, became their sustenance, a reminder that their flight was not only from danger, but toward a life of possibility, where choices would belong to them alone, rather than being dictated by the expectations and cruelty of others. Their journey, already fraught with peril, revealed the stark contrasts of the world around them. Rolling hills and dense forests offered refuge, yet they were also filled with unknown threats. Kind strangers provided shelter, food and advice, risking their own safety for the chance to aid freedom. Yet, betrayal lurked in corners, as some could not resist reporting suspicious activity for reward or social standing. Each decision, each step required careful judgment, a delicate balance between hope and caution, and through it all, the urgency of the pursuit reminded them that the world they sought could not be taken for granted, that every choice carried consequences that could alter their lives irrevocably. The journey north was far more treacherous than the plantation daughter and her father's slave could have anticipated, a relentless test of endurance, wit and courage. Every mile they traveled brought them closer to the promise of freedom, yet also deeper into danger. The roads were not kind. They were dusty and uneven, lined with forests that seemed both protective and menacing, hiding predators both human and wild. Each night, they huddled in the shadows, listening for the distant sound of pursuit, the echo of horses' hooves or the soft murmur of voices carried by the wind. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by fear and the need for vigilance, yet each morning they forced themselves to rise, to push forward, guided by determination and the faint hope of a life beyond the chains of their path. They relied on the stars for navigation, their constellations familiar but distant, a compass in the vast unknown. Rivers and streams provided both sustenance and obstacles, requiring careful crossing to avoid detection. Swollen by recent rains, waterways became formidable barriers that demanded ingenuity and physical strength. In these moments they discovered resources within themselves they had never known exist. The young man, whose strength and intelligence had long been apparent, proved indispensable, devising ways to transport them across treacherous terrain without leaving traces. The young woman, despite her sheltered upbringing, displayed remarkable resilience and quick thinking, learning to read the land, to move silently, and to anticipate dangers that could arise at any moment. As they moved through towns and rural settlements, they had to adopt new identities, shedding the ones that could expose them. The young woman no longer presented herself as a plantation daughter. She changed her clothing, her mannerisms, even her speech, learning quickly to blend into unfamiliar communities. The young man too assumed a careful disguise,
masking the telltale signs of a life spent in bondage. Each encounter with strangers was a delicate dance, a test of nerves and subtlety. The slightest misstep could reveal them, and the consequences of discovery were severe: return to the plantation, imprisonment, or worse. They became experts at reading people, gauging intentions and determining whom they could trust, developing a cautious confidence that came only from repeated experience under pressure. Along the way, they discovered the hidden veins of resistance and assistance that existed in the North. Abolitionist sympathizers, freedmen and clandestine networks provided food, shelter and guidance. These allies, often risking their own lives, helped them navigate unfamiliar terrain, teaching them secret paths and hiding places that were invisible to the casual observer. They encountered families who had themselves fled the bonds of oppression and understood the urgency of their flight. Each act of kindness reinforced their hope, even as the danger loomed ever present, reminding them that freedom was attainable, but not without peril. The psychological toll of the journey was immense. Fear was constant, a shadow that followed them relentlessly. The knowledge that bounty hunters and plantation agents were searching for them weighed heavily, manifesting in sleepless nights and tense days. Yet intertwined with fear was a growing sense of purpose, a recognition that their actions were a challenge to the system of control and oppression that had defined their lives. Each day they survived became a small victory, each moment of evasion a testament to their ingenuity and courage. They were no longer merely fleeing, they were actively shaping their destiny, confronting the limitations imposed upon them and refusing to yield. The young woman's feelings for her companion deepened under the strain of shared hardship. In the quiet moments between hiding and moving, they spoke of dreams and fears, of families left behind, and of the life they longed to build together. Love in its raw and unfiltered form became both a comfort and a driving force. It gave them strength to persevere, to confront obstacles that might have otherwise seemed insurmountable. It was also a reminder of the stakes involved. Their bond made the risk of capture even more consequential, for neither would accept life without the other. As the weeks stretched into months, the fugitives encountered numerous obstacles that tested their resolve. Harsh weather battered them, storms turning roads to mud and rivers into torrent. Illness threatened to slow them down, yet they pressed on, using rudimentary knowledge and whatever supplies they could find. Hunger and exhaustion were constant companions, yet their determination never wavered. They learned to move with stealth, to anticipate the movements of those pursuing them, and to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. The terrain itself became an ally and an adversary, offering concealment, but also demanding respect and caution. Along their route, they occasionally left subtle signs for allies to follow, small markers that indicated safe havens or warnings of danger. These signs were carefully crafted, legible only to those who knew the code, a silent communication across miles of perilous travel. They also took note of every river crossing, road junction and forest clearing, building a mental map that would guide them further north. Each step was deliberate, a calculated measure against the unpredictable forces they faced, from human pursuers to the unforgiving wilderness. The fugitives learned to live with uncertainty as a constant companion, days without food or safe shelter, nights under cold skies, and the constant need for vigilance sharpened their instinct. Each encounter with a potential threat was a lesson in survival, and each successful evasion reinforced their confidence. Despite the exhaustion and fear, there was a growing exhilaration in knowing that they were actively defying the rigid social order, carving a path for themselves in a world determined to keep them confined. They also discovered that trust was both essential and precarious. While many offered aid, others betrayed, whether out of fear, self-interest or loyalty to the oppressive system they sought to evade. This taught them discernment, a skill that was as vital as their physical endurance. They became masters of observation, interpreting subtle cues in behavior, tone, and expression to gauge whether a person could be trusted. Each successful interaction with an ally strengthened their hope. Each betrayal reinforced the vigilance that had become second nature. Through it all, the bond between the plantation daughter and her companion grew stronger. Shared adversity, reliance on.
The fugitive pair's journey through the North became increasingly complex as they ventured further from the familiar landscapes of the South. The dense forests, winding rivers, and sparsely populated settlements provided both sanctuary and risk, shaping their every movement with calculated care. Each day was a test of patience, observation, and courage, requiring them to assess the terrain, anticipate threats, and constantly adapt to circumstances that could shift in an instant. The further they traveled, the more they realized that survival depended not only on their physical endurance but also on the networks of people who were willing to risk everything to aid them. These networks were scattered, often secretive, and operated under the constant threat of exposure. Quakers, abolitionist sympathizers, and freedmen provided discreet guidance, food, and temporary shelter. Each encounter demanded caution, while some welcomed them with open arms. Others required subtle probing to ensure trustworthiness. They learned to read behaviors, expressions, and speech patterns, to detect lies or concealed intentions, and to understand when silence was safer than words. These interactions taught them that survival was as much about perception and intelligence as it was about speed or strength. Hiding in safe houses became an art form, requiring patience, ingenuity, and resilience. Closets, attics, and hidden alcoves offered temporary refuge from pursuers, each space carefully prepared by those who understood the stakes. Time was measured not by the sun or the stars alone, but by the vigilance required to remain undetected. Even small mistakes, a creaking floorboard, a misinterpreted gesture, a sudden cough, could alert observers to their presence. The psychological strain was immense, but each successful evasion reinforced their growing confidence, proving that they could outwit those who sought to capture them. The constant need to move while remaining undetected shaped their relationship in profound ways. They learned to communicate silently, through gestures, glances, and subtle cues, conveying directions, warnings, and reassurances without words. Trust became absolute, for any hesitation or doubt could result in disaster. The young woman, who had grown up in the controlled environment of a plantation, discovered a resilience and resourcefulness she had never imagined. The young man, accustomed to living under the shadow of oppression, revealed an ingenuity and courage that was both protective and inspiring. Together they became a team, finely attuned to one another, each movement a reflection of shared knowledge, instinct, and reliance. The environment itself presented constant challenges. Rivers swelled unexpectedly, requiring daring crossings. Forests concealed hidden hazards, from wild animals to treacherous terrain. And towns, while potential sources of aid, could just as easily be places of danger if informants or bounty hunters were nearby. They had to calculate every step, deciding when to rest, when to move, and when to risk exposure for food or water. Each choice carried weighty consequences, and every decision demanded careful consideration of the potential outcome. Their journey became a series of calculated risks, balancing immediate survival against the ultimate goal of reaching freedom. Weather added another layer of adversity. Rainstorms turned roads into mud, soaking their clothing and chilling their bodies. Scorching sun left them dehydrated and exhausted, and cold nights tested their endurance and resolve. They learned to anticipate changes in the weather, using natural signs to guide their movements and determine safe places to rest. Even the simplest tasks, like finding clean water or preparing a meal, became exercises in ingenuity and perseverance. Each day's survival was a small victory, each night a respite that required constant vigilance to maintain their safety. Despite the dangers, moments of humanity and kindness punctuated their journey. Strangers offered bread, a place to sleep, or guidance, often at great personal risk. These acts of generosity reminded them that even in a divided and dangerous world, solidarity and compassion existed. Yet trust was never guaranteed. Betrayal was always a possibility, and they remained alert to any sign that their hosts might not be what they seemed. This constant evaluation of risk versus reward became second nature, a skill as crucial to survival as the ability to move swiftly or hide effectively. Their understanding of freedom evolved with each passing mile. It was no longer an abstract concept or a distant dream. It became tangible, measured in the small victories of evasion, the successful crossings of rivers, the safe arrival at hidden lodging. Each step forward was a reclamation of autonomy, a defiance of the social structures that had dictated their lives. Yet they also understood the fragility of this freedom, recognizing that one misstep could erase everything they had achieved. This awareness heightened their sense of purpose and sharpened their instincts, creating a delicate balance between hope and caution. Physical endurance became a daily challenge. Hunger gnawed at them, fatigue clouded judgment, and the demands of constant movement left their bodies bruised, sore, and weary. Yet each obstacle reinforced their determination. They discovered inner reserves of strength, pushing through pain and exhaustion, drawing motivation from their shared commitment to survive and the dream of a life unfettered by oppression. The young woman's courage grew with each challenge, transforming her from a sheltered child of privilege into a woman capable of facing danger with intelligence and resolve. The young man's leadership and ingenuity were equally tested, proving that his survival skills and resourcefulness were indispensable in navigating the perils of the journey. The psychological strain was immense. The fear of capture, the uncertainty of the road ahead, and the knowledge that they were constantly being hunted created a tension that never fully lifted. Sleep, when it came, was restless and filled with dreams of pursuit. Each rustle of leaves, each distant sound was interpreted as a potential threat, yet intertwined with fear was exhilaration, a recognition that they were defying the expectations and constraints of the world. taking control of their destinies in ways that few could imagine. This duality of fear and exhilaration became a constant companion, shaping their perception of the world and their relationship with one another. Through these trials, their relationship deepened. Shared hardship and mutual reliance forged a bond that was unbreakable, built on trust, respect, and the understanding that their survival depended on unity. Love, forged in the crucible of danger and uncertainty, became a source of strength, a reason to persist when all else seemed hopeless. Each moment together, whether spent planning, hiding, or simply sharing a quiet meal, reinforced the intimacy of their connection, proving that even in the harshest conditions, human connection could flourish. Their journey north was a continuous test of courage, resourcefulness, and resilience. Every mile brought new challenges, every day demanded careful calculation, and every encounter required discernment. Yet with each step they moved closer to a life defined by choice rather than circumstance, a life in which their destinies were determined by their own actions rather than the rigid structures of society. The North, though not free from danger or prejudice, offered the promise of possibility, and each day that they pressed forward was a step toward reclaiming the autonomy that had long been denied to them. The psychological and emotional weight of their journey began to settle heavily on the plantation daughter and her companion as they pushed further north, each day revealing new layers of challenge and introspection. The fear that had initially driven their flight transformed into a complex mix of anxiety, vigilance, and cautious hope. Every sound in the forest, every unexpected encounter on the roads, could be the harbinger of capture. The young woman, once sheltered by wealth and status, was learning to interpret subtle signs in the environment, the way a bird might react to movement, the snap of a twig underfoot, the distant murmur of human voices carried by the wind. These cues, previously irrelevant in her life of comfort, had now become matters of survival. The young man, too, was constantly alert, relying on his experience with the constraints of bondage and the dangers of pursuit. He had lived a life under surveillance, where a single misstep could lead to brutal punishment or death. Now, with their freedom at stake, that vigilance was amplified. He guided their movements carefully, balancing speed with stealth, ensuring that no careless action would betray their presence. He also became a teacher to the young woman, instructing her in the subtle skills of observation, silence, and discretion. Each lesson was practical but also deeply symbolic, representing her gradual transformation from a life of dependency to one of autonomy and resilience. Despite the constant fear, moments of reflection and intimacy emerged, revealing the depth of their bond. They spoke in whispers late at night, sharing thoughts, dreams, and confessions. The young woman admitted her doubts, the fear that they might be captured or that the world beyond the South might not be as welcoming as they hoped. The young man shared his own insecurities, the weight of years spent in oppression, and the anxiety that their journey might end in failure. These conversations, though steeped in vulnerability, strengthened their connection, proving that trust and love could flourish even under extreme pressure. Each moment together became a vital source of emotional sustenance, a reminder of why they had undertaken this perilous path in the first place. The physical demands of the journey compounded the psychological strain. Walking for hours through uneven terrain, fording rivers swollen with rain, and hiding in dense underbrush exhausted their bodies. Hunger gnawed persistently, forcing them to ration whatever food they could acquire, often scavenged or provided by sympathetic strangers. Cold nights required improvisation for warmth, and every stop for rest increased the risk of detection. Yet these hardships fostered ingenuity. They learned to camouflage their presence, to move silently, and to use natural features of the landscape to their advantage. Each obstacle they overcame reinforced their confidence and survival skills, a tangible proof of their growing competence in navigating a world that sought to control them. The psychological burden of constant danger took a toll on their interactions with others. They could not afford casual conversation with strangers, and each village or settlement they passed required careful assessment. Misreading a person's intentions could lead to betrayal, capture. The young woman became adept at observing expressions and listening for inconsistencies in speech, while the young man evaluated character and motivations based on experience and instinct. Together they learned to negotiate the delicate balance between trust and caution, aware that alliances could be fleeting and that even well-meaning individuals could inadvertently place them in peril. Every day was also a confrontation with their own internal struggle. The young woman wrestled with guilt for leaving behind her family, though that guilt was intertwined with a realization that her departure was necessary for her autonomy. The young man carried the memory of years of exploitation, and the fear that his pursuit of freedom could endanger both of them. These internal conflicts required constant mental fortitude, as dwelling too long on fear or regret could weaken their resolve. They relied on one another for support, their partnership becoming a mutual anchor against despair,
a shared commitment to pressing forward despite the emotional weight of their journey. The societal pressures they had fled from were never far from their mind. The rigid hierarchies of the South, the assumptions about race and class, and the ever-present threat of retribution shaped their perception of the world. Even in the North, where slavery was less pervasive, they were acutely aware of prejudice and the potential for exploitation. Their journey was not simply a physical escape, it was a confrontation with the broader societal forces that had confined them. They had to learn not only to survive physically, but also to navigate the complexities of a society that might not fully accept them even as they sought freedom. Resourcefulness became crucial. They scavenged for food, found hidden wells and streams for water, and discovered natural shelters in the forest. They learned to travel during the night, guided by the stars, and to rest during daylight hours in places that offered concealment. Each choice required careful judgment, whether to risk moving through a settlement, to cross a river during daylight, or to seek help from a stranger. These decisions, made repeatedly over weeks, honed their instincts and reinforced their reliance on one another. They were no longer passive fugitives, they had become strategists, adapting constantly to the dynamic landscape of danger and opportunity. The psychological tension was exacerbated by the uncertainty of the road ahead. They had no map, no concrete destination, only the hope that continuing north would bring them closer to safety. The uncertainty required resilience and optimism, qualities that were strengthened through small victories, successfully evading pursuers, finding shelter and obtaining food. Each success, however minor, was a tangible reinforcement of their ability to survive and a psychological buffer against the persistent fear that accompanied them. Throughout the journey they also contended with the physical and mental effects of isolation. The lack of familiar faces and the constant need for secrecy created a unique strain, as moments of solitude could be both a relief and a source of anxiety. They relied on each other for conversation, decision-making, and emotional support. The shared experience of survival, combined with the ever-present danger, forged a deep interdependence that transcended friendship or romantic attachment. It was a bond rooted in the necessity of mutual survival. As the weeks passed, they became increasingly attuned to the natural world as a guide and protector. The position of the sun, the flow of rivers, the behavior of animals, all provided crucial information for navigation and concealment. The young woman, who had grown up in a world of cultivated gardens and polished floors, learned to read the forest, to identify edible plants and to move without leaving a trace. The young man, drawing on his own knowledge and experience, taught her to recognize hazards and opportunities in the environment. Their survival depended on this mastery of their surroundings, a skill that required constant observation, adaptability, and ingenuity. Through all of this, their understanding of freedom evolved. It was no longer an abstract concept tied to ideology or dreams. It was tangible, measured in steps traveled without detection, in nights spent hidden and safe, in the ability to make choices independently of the oppressive forces that had sought to control them. Freedom was fragile and constantly tested, but it was also increasingly real, offering motivation and focus. Each day they moved north, each obstacle overcome, was a step toward reclaiming agency over their lives and defining their future on their own terms. The necessity of constant vigilance became the defining feature of the plantation daughter and her companion's journey as they pressed further north. Each day a delicate balance between hope and fear. The landscape, though beautiful in its own right, was filled with hidden danger. Forests, dense and shadowed, offered concealment, but also concealed threats, wild animals, sudden drops, and the ever-present possibility of discovery by those who pursued them. Roads that appeared empty could hide informants or bounty hunters, and seemingly welcoming settlements might conceal spies or hostile townsfolk. Every decision, from the choice of path to the timing of rest, carried immense weight, for a single miscalculation could undo months of careful planning. They learned quickly that movement itself required strategy. Traveling by night became a necessity, guided by the stars, the moon, and subtle landmarks in the terrain. Daylight was reserved for rest in concealed areas, often under the canopy of trees, in abandoned buildings, or behind natural formations that shielded them from sight. These pauses were brief and calculated, designed not only for physical recovery but also to maintain mental clarity. Fatigue could be as dangerous as pursuit. Drowsiness dulled senses and slowed reaction times, increasing the risk of detection. They became masters of pacing, conserving energy while ensuring progress toward their ultimate goal of freedom. Trust was a constant consideration. Though some strangers offered food, directions, or shelter, every interaction carried risk. The young woman and her companion developed subtle tests to gauge intentions, observing body language, tone, and attention to detail. They became skilled at asking indirect questions, watching for hesitation, or noting inconsistencies in stories. Each encounter required careful navigation, for even well-meaning individuals could inadvertently jeopardize their safety. The lessons in discernment grew more refined with each passing day, forging their ability to judge human behavior with precision born of necessity. Physical hardship remained relentless. Hunger gnawed at them, forcing them to ration scant provisions or rely on whatever could be foraged. Streams and rivers offered water, but also danger, for movements near them could reveal footprints or attract attention. Exposure to the elements heat, rain, wind, and cold tested endurance. Illness, minor injuries, or fatigue became threats that could compromise both mobility and alertness. They learned to improvise solutions, crafting makeshift tools, shelters, and remedies, drawing on the knowledge and ingenuity of both the young man and the young woman. Each problem solved was a triumph, a reinforcement of their ability to survive in a world that offered little mercy. The psychological strain was as significant as the physical. Fear was omnipresent, a shadow that lurked at the edges of every thought. The knowledge that bounty hunters, overseers, or even neighbors might be searching tirelessly for them created tension that never fully abated. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by nightmares of capture, and every rustle in the underbrush set nerves on edge. Yet intertwined with fear was the growing recognition of their agency. They were no longer passive victims of circumstance. They had taken control of their destiny. Each mile traveled, each obstacle overcome, reinforced their capacity for independence and resilience. Their relationship, already strengthened by shared adversity, deepened further under the pressures of constant danger. Communication had become a nuanced language of gestures, whispers, and brief touches. Each look carried meaning, each motion a signal. Trust had to be absolute, for hesitation or misunderstanding could lead to disaster. Emotional reliance became as critical as physical support. They discovered an intimacy forged not only through affection but also through mutual dependence, an understanding that their survival and the preservation of their fledgling freedom depended entirely on their cooperation and coordination. The environment itself presented both challenges and guidance. They learned to read natural signs. The flow of rivers indicated possible crossings. The behavior of animals suggested nearby threats, and changes in the wind or clouds forecasted weather conditions. Every observation informed their movements, helping them avoid danger or locate resources. The young woman, previously unaccustomed to wilderness survival, quickly adapted, absorbing lessons from her companion and the environment itself. Each success in navigating these elements reinforced confidence and reinforced the bond between them, as they realized that mutual learning and adaptation were essential to enduring the journey. Encounters with sympathetic individuals were rare but transformed. Abolitionist networks, freedmen, and clandestine allies provided crucial assistance. Safe houses offered shelter, food, and rest, often at significant risk to those providing it. Each act of kindness reminded the fugitives that freedom was not an individual pursuit alone but a collective endeavor supported by those willing to defy societal norms. Yet, even within these networks, caution remained paramount. Betrayal or inadvertent exposure could occur at any moment, and the fugitives maintained vigilance, blending gratitude with guarded awareness. The mental and emotional fortitude required extended beyond fear and vigilance. The young woman grappled with guilt over leaving her family, even as she recognized the necessity of their escape. The young man carried the burden of his past, of years lived in subjugation, and the constant tension between hope and the reality of their precarious position. These internal struggles demanded resilience, reflection, and the ability to compartmentalize fear to maintain focus on immediate needs. They became adept at managing these emotions.
The fugitive pair's journey grew ever more perilous as they ventured farther north, each day intensifying the stakes of survival. They had learned to move with stealth, to read the land as if it were a living map, and to anticipate the movements of those who hunted them. The forests, fields, and rivers that stretched before them were both allies and obstacles, offering concealment while demanding constant vigilance. Each decision about when to move, when to rest, and which path to follow was informed by both instinct and experience, a delicate calculus in which the wrong choice could result in capture, injury, or death. Rivers became formidable barriers and essential lifelines at the same time. They provided water and opportunities for temporary respite, yet crossing them demanded ingenuity and caution. Swollen by recent rains or hidden under shadows of dense trees, these waterways could easily conceal hazards. Currents strong enough to sweep one away, slippery banks that could betray a misstep, and shallow areas where pursuers might observe them. Each river crossing became a calculated risk, a moment when physical strength, coordination, and timing had to align perfectly. The young man often took the lead in these situations, using his knowledge and experience to ensure their safety, while the young woman learned quickly, adapting to the challenges of the environment and building confidence in her own resourcefulness. Night travel was both a necessity and a trial. Guided by the stars and the subtle changes in terrain, they moved quietly under the cover of darkness. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustle in the leaves, a distant animal call could signal danger. Their senses became finely attuned to these cues, each movement deliberate and measured. The night, while offering concealment, also amplified the psychological pressures of the journey. Darkness obscured potential threats and limited visibility, requiring them to rely on intuition and shared experience. The bond between them deepened in these moments of shared vigilance, as they communicated with subtle gestures and whispered signals, maintaining coordination without attracting attention. The challenge of food and sustenance became increasingly acute. Rationing became essential, and foraging was a skill they had to acquire quickly. They learned to identify edible plants, find hidden fruits and nuts, and catch small game when the opportunity arose. Each meal, however modest, became a source of relief and a temporary reprieve from the physical demands of their flight. Hunger, though persistent, sharpened their senses and reinforced their ingenuity. They discovered that survival depended not only on movement, but on the ability to sustain themselves quietly, efficiently, and without drawing notice. Weather, ever unpredictable, added another layer of complexity. Torrential rains could turn paths into mud, making progress slow and leaving traces that could be followed by pursuers. Scorching heat drained strength and left them vulnerable to dehydration. Cold nights required ingenuity in creating warmth from limited resources, whether through layered clothing, natural shelters, or small fires carefully concealed to avoid smoke detection. Each environmental challenge demanded adaptation, and each successful navigation of these elements reinforced their confidence in survival instinct. The natural world became both a teacher and a test, shaping their skills and resilience in ways that the controlled confines of the plantation never could. Human interaction was fraught with peril. Though some individuals offered aid, the threat of betrayal was constant. The young woman and her companion developed strategies for assessing trustworthiness, interpreting subtle cues, and deciding when to engage or remain silent. They learned to disguise their identities, to present themselves in ways that would not arouse suspicion, and to use indirect communication to protect their true intentions. Each interaction required mental agility, as the stakes were not merely social but existential. A single error in judgment could undo weeks of careful planning and place them back in the hands of those who would see them return to bondage. The physical and psychological toll of their journey was immense. Long hours of travel, often without proper rest or nourishment, tested their endurance. Each day brought fatigue that threatened to erode both focus and morale, yet the young woman's courage and the young man's experience allowed them to press forward. They learned to balance exertion with necessary pauses, to recognize the body's limits while pushing just enough to maintain momentum. Mental resilience became as critical as physical strength, for the constant presence of danger demanded unwavering alertness, strategic thinking, and the ability to manage fear and stress. The psychological burden was further compounded by the uncertainty of their path. They had no map, no guarantee of sanctuary, and no certainty that those who might help them would be reliable. Each decision required foresight, risk assessment, and trust in their own judgment. They developed contingency plans, memorized landmarks, and created mental maps that guided their progress. The ability to anticipate potential hazards and adapt quickly became essential, sharpening both their intellect and instincts in ways that transformed them from vulnerable fugitives into strategic navigators of a hostile landscape. The bond between the young woman and her companion deepened as they navigated these perils. Reliance on one another for guidance, protection, and emotional support became indispensable. Shared adversity forged an intimacy that transcended the physical, rooted in mutual respect, trust, and the understanding that survival depended on unity. Moments of vulnerability were met with reassurance and care, while moments of doubt were tempered by mutual encouragement. The relationship became both a source of strength and a tactical asset, enhancing their ability to respond to challenges as a cohesive unit rather than as two separate individuals. Encounters with allies, though rare, were transformative. Safe houses, often operated by abolitionists or freedmen, provided temporary refuge and essential supplies. These places offered not only physical respite, but also psychological reinforcement, reminding them that they were not alone in their quest for freedom. Each act of kindness reinforced the moral and practical support underlying the broader struggle against oppression. Yet the fugitives remained cautious, understanding that even well-meaning assistance carried risk. Vigilance remained paramount, and gratitude was always tempered with discretion and strategy. The pursuit by those who sought their capture was relentless, a shadow that followed them through forests, fields, and settlements. Notices describing them had circulated widely, and bounty hunters, overseers, and local authorities were on alert. The constant threat of discovery kept them alert, sharpening instincts and reinforcing the importance of stealth. They learned to anticipate likely search patterns, avoid predictable routes, and employ misdirection when necessary. Each narrow escape reinforced confidence and deepened their understanding of both human behavior and the complexities of the landscape they traversed. As the days and weeks passed, freedom became increasingly tangible, measured not in ideology but in survival and agency. Each mile traveled without detection, each obstacle overcome, became a tangible victory. Their understanding of liberty evolved, transforming from an abstract dream into a lived reality, fragile yet increasingly attainable. The hardships of the journey, from hunger and fatigue to fear and uncertainty, were not merely obstacles but lessons in resilience, ingenuity and the profound value of autonomy. The journey north grew increasingly demanding as the plantation daughter and her companion navigated the unpredictable landscapes of 1853 America, their every step measured against danger, exhaustion and uncertainty. The forests thickened, rivers became broader and more treacherous, and the small towns they passed offered both potential refuge and hidden peril. Each decision about where to rest, when to move, and whom to trust required careful calculation, for the consequences of error were immediate and severe. Their understanding of survival evolved constantly, a blend of physical skill, mental acuity and emotional endurance, that grew sharper with each passing day. Night travel became an essential strategy, offering concealment under the cover of darkness, but also presenting its own challenges. The young woman and her companion learned to read the terrain by the faint light of the moon and the arrangement of the stars, using these natural guides to maintain direction without drawing attention. Every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of an animal, the creak of a branch underfoot, was analyzed for threat. Silence became a language of its own, a mode of communication between them that relied on gestures, glances and subtle movements to coordinate without alerting potential pursuers. The night was simultaneously ally and adversary, offering concealment while demanding heightened awareness and constant vigilance. Food and water remained scarce concerns that shaped their choices daily. Rationing was necessary, with each morsel of sustenance carefully measured to last as long as possible. Streams and rivers provided water but demanded caution, for proximity to water sources could expose footprints or reveal their presence to hunters. The young man demonstrated ingenuity in identifying safe sources, teaching his companion to recognize subtle indicators of drinkable water and edible plants. Each meal obtained was a small triumph, not only nourishing their bodies but reinforcing their capacity to adapt to a hostile environment. Hunger sharpened their awareness, forcing them to remain alert, while also cultivating creativity and finding sustenance. Weather compounded the difficulty of their trek. Sudden storms could turn paths into quagmires, slowing progress and leaving traces that could betray their movement. Heat during the day drained energy and created the risk of dehydration, while cold nights required the clever use of clothing, natural insulation and hidden shelters to retain warmth. They learned to anticipate these environmental challenges, interpreting clouds, wind shifts, and animal behavior as indicators of impending change. Their ability to adapt to the forces of nature became as critical as their ability to avoid human threats, a constant negotiation between physical endurance and environmental strategy. Interactions with other people remained fraught with danger. While occasional allies offered refuge and aid, the threat of betrayal lingered constantly. The young woman learned to mask her identity, modifying her mannerisms, speech and dress to avoid recognition. The young man, drawing on experience, coached her in subtle forms of deception, teaching her how to ask indirect questions, avoid revealing details, and recognize potentially hostile intentions. Each encounter required rapid judgment, balancing trust with caution. Even minor errors, misreading a gesture, revealing too much information, could result in capture or death. Their lives depended on a delicate interplay of perception, intuition and strategic thinking. The physical demands of continuous travel were severe. Long hours on foot, often over uneven terrain, led to exhaustion, muscle soreness, and the persistent threat of injury. Streams, dense brush, and rocky inclines tested balance and coordination, while the constant need for stealth slowed progress and magnified fatigue. Despite these hardships, both learned to push beyond their previous limits, discovering resilience they had not known they possessed. The young woman's transformation from a sheltered plantation child into a resourceful, determined traveler became evident, while the young man's knowledge of survival and tactics proved invaluable in navigating these challenges. Psychological strain was ever present. Fear of capture, anxiety over unforeseen dangers, and the uncertainty of the future created a mental burden that weighed heavily on both. Sleep was often interrupted by dreams of pursuit, or the stress of vigilance, leaving them fatigued yet unable to relax fully. Anxiety was tempered by determination, as each step forward was a conscious act of defiance against the oppressive structures they had fled. The interplay of fear, hope, and courage shaped their perspective, heightening alertness, while reinforcing the importance of resilience and careful planning. Their relationship deepened under these conditions, evolving into a partnership grounded in necessity,
trust and shared experience. Communication relied on subtle cues and unspoken understanding, each action coordinated to maximize safe. Mutual reliance extended beyond emotional support to practical decision-making, with both learning to anticipate the other's needs, strengths, and limitations. The shared adversity fostered intimacy, revealing the emotional depth that hardship can cultivate and reinforcing the bond that was as vital to survival as physical endurance. Encounters with allies, though rare, reinforced the importance of community and solidarity. Abolitionist sympathizers and freedmen provided temporary shelter, food and guidance, often at great personal risk. These interactions not only facilitated survival but also offered hope, reminding the fugitives that freedom was possible, and that others were willing to support. Each act of kindness was weighed carefully, however, as trust had to be earned and vigilance maintained. The young woman and her companion navigated these interactions with a mix of gratitude, caution and strategic awareness, understanding that even well-intentioned aid could be exploited by those seeking to capture them. The constant pursuit by bounty hunters and overseers shaped their strategies and movements. Notices describing their identities had circulated, and reports of tracking parties heightened the risk of detection. Their survival depended on anticipating likely routes, employing misdirection, and using the terrain to their advantage. Each successful evasion reinforced their confidence, teaching lessons in patience, observation, and the subtleties of movement. They learned to interpret the world with precision, recognizing patterns, predicting behavior and adapting quickly to changing circumstances. As the journey progressed, the fugitives' concept of freedom became increasingly tangible. It was no longer a distant abstraction but a daily reality measured in steps taken without detection, nights spent safely hidden, and the ability to make decisions independently of oppressive authority. Each mile traveled north represented both physical distance from the plantation and a symbolic movement toward autonomy and self-determination. The hardships they endured heightened their appreciation for freedom, emphasizing its fragility and the constant vigilance required to maintain. Through these challenges, their bond was reinforced as both an emotional and tactical necessity. Trust, communication, and shared judgment became inseparable from survival. They relied on each other's strengths, compensated for weaknesses, and developed a mutual intuition that allowed rapid, coordinated responses to danger. This partnership was a source of resilience, hope and strength, demonstrating that human connection could endure and even flourish in conditions of extreme adversity. Their journey illustrated that survival was not simply an individual endeavor but a shared effort, dependent on collaboration, trust, and the capacity to adapt to a world defined by danger and uncertainty. The terrain itself became a teacher, offering lessons in both caution and opportunity. Rivers, forests, and fields required constant assessment for their potential to conceal or reveal, while the movement of animals and changes in weather provided crucial signals. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities for learning, reinforcing the fugitives' growing skill in navigating a hostile environment. Mastery of the land became inseparable from their progress toward freedom, highlighting the interconnectedness of survival, strategy, and awareness. The journey of the plantation daughter and her companion intensified as they ventured deeper into the north, each day bringing new tests of endurance, ingenuity, and courage. The landscapes, though breathtaking in their natural beauty, presented constant challenge. Dense forests required careful navigation, rivers presented formidable obstacles, and towns were fraught with both potential assistance and danger. Every step had to be measured, every decision calculated, for a single misstep could mean capture, punishment, or worse. They were no longer merely fleeing, they were strategists of survival, reading the world with a heightened awareness born of necessity and fear. Night became their most reliable. Traveling under the cover of darkness allowed them to move with greater stealth, but it also demanded acute attention. Shadows concealed not only their path but also the dangers that lurked within it. Each rustle of leaves, snap of a branch, or distant sound required interpretation. The young woman and her companion developed a subtle language of gestures and glances to communicate silently, ensuring coordination without revealing their presence. Moving at night taught them to trust instinct and intuition as much as sight, sharpening their senses and deepening the unspoken understanding between them. Physical endurance became a daily test. Long hours on foot, often over uneven terrain, left their muscles sore and bodies fatigued. The challenge of maintaining energy while evading detection forced them to ration food carefully and to improvise methods of sustenance. Streams provided water but could also reveal their trade. Foraging for edible plants, catching small game, and utilizing hidden supplies required creativity and persistence. Each successful act of sustenance reinforced their confidence, proving that they could survive in conditions far removed from the comforts of their previous life. The psychological strain of constant vigilance was immense. Fear of discovery shadowed every action, and the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on their minds. Sleep was fitful and often interrupted by dreams of capture or pursuit, leaving them physically exhausted yet mentally alert. Anxiety coexisted with hope, creating a tension that demanded resilience and focus. They had to compartmentalize fear, using it as a tool to remain aware while preventing it from paralyzing action. Over time, this psychological training became as crucial to their survival as physical skill and resourcefulness. Interactions with others required extreme caution, while occasional allies, abolitionists, freedmen, and sympathetic townspeople, offered temporary refuge. The threat of betrayal remained constant. Each encounter required observation, subtle questioning, and careful evaluation of trustworthiness. The young woman learned to modify her appearance, mannerisms, and speech to avoid detection, while the young man applied his knowledge and instincts to assess the intentions of strangers. They learned that every interaction carried risk and that caution was essential, for even well-meaning assistance could inadvertently place them in jeopardy. Weather was both an obstacle and a guide. Rainstorms transformed paths into mud and made movement treacherous, while high winds and heat drained their strength and tested endurance. Cold nights demanded creative solutions to retain warmth, from layering clothing to finding natural shelter. Reading the environment became a critical skill, interpreting the behavior of animals, the condition of rivers, and the formation of clouds to anticipate hazards. Mastery of these environmental cues became inseparable from survival, teaching lessons that no formal instruction could provide. Their bond strengthened under the pressure of shared adversity. Mutual reliance for guidance, protection, and emotional support became essential. They developed an intuitive understanding of each other's thoughts, needs, and responses, which allowed for silent coordination in high-stress situations. Trust became absolute, for any hesitation or miscommunication could have deadly consequences. The shared experience of danger and the need for collaboration forged an intimacy that transcended mere companionship, blending emotional connection with tactical necessity. Encounters with allies, though infrequent, were vital. Safe houses provided shelter, food, and brief respite, offering moments of psychological relief amid relentless stress. These encounters reminded them that their struggle was not isolated, that networks of individuals were committed to assisting those seeking freedom. Yet they remained cautious, aware that the security of these havens could be compromised and that vigilance was always required. They approached each aid giver with a mixture of gratitude, respect, and careful discernment, understanding that their survival relied as much on prudence as on the generosity of others. The presence of pursuers loomed constant. Notices and descriptions had been circulated, and bounty hunters actively scoured the countryside. This relentless threat demanded strategic planning, misdirection, and acute observation. The fugitives learned to anticipate likely search patterns, avoid predictable routes, and conceal signs of their passage. Each successful evasion reinforced their confidence and sharpened their instinct. They became adept at reading human behavior and interpreting environmental cues, integrating these observations into a sophisticated survival strategy that combined intellect, intuition, and physical skill. Psychological endurance remained as critical as physical capability. The stress of uncertainty, the fear of capture, and the pressure of continuous movement could have undermined resolve. Yet they learned to harness these challenges as motivation. The young woman, growing in resilience and self-reliance, discovered a depth of courage previously unknown to her sheltered upbringing. The young man, whose experience had always been shadowed by oppression, demonstrated resourcefulness and ingenuity that were essential to their progress. Their complementary strengths reinforced one another, creating a dynamic of mutual support that was vital for both survival and psychological stability. Navigating terrain became an exercise in observation and strategy. Rivers, forests, hills, and open fields each demanded unique approach. They adapted to the rhythms of the land, learning when to rest, when to move, and how to utilize natural features for concealment. Each successful adaptation reinforced confidence and skill, contributing to a growing sense of agency and autonomy. The journey was not merely a flight from danger, but a continual engagement with the environment, teaching them mastery of both natural and social landscapes. Freedom evolved from an abstract ideal to a tangible goal. It was measured in the distance traveled without detection, the nights spent safely hidden, and the ability to act independently of oppressive forces. Each small success brought them closer to the reality of self-determination. The hardships endured, from hunger and fatigue to fear and uncertainty, emphasized the fragility and value of liberty, making each step forward a testament to resilience, courage, and determination. Through all challenges, their partnership became indispensable. Communication, trust, and mutual reliance were inseparable from survival. They anticipated each other's needs, compensated for weaknesses, and acted in concert to navigate threats. This collaboration was both practical and emotional, offering strength, hope, and reassurance. The journey underscored the essential role of human connection and overcoming adversity, demonstrating that survival depended as much on partnership as on individual capability. Their understanding of the world and its dangers deepened day. They learned to anticipate human behavior, to read environmental signs, and to apply lessons from each encounter to future decisions. Experience transformed them from vulnerable fugitives into strategic, adaptable and perceptive individuals. Their journey was as much an education in resilience, intelligence, and courage as it was a flight to safety, shaping their character and strengthening their determination to reach freedom.
The final leg of their journey demanded the highest levels of endurance, ingenuity, and courage as the plantation daughter and her companion moved closer to the northern states, where freedom promised safety but remained uncertain and elusive. The terrain grew increasingly varied, presenting new challenges in the form of dense forests, wide rivers, and undulating hills, each with hidden risks. Their understanding of survival had evolved beyond mere instinct. It had become a complex interplay of observation, strategy, and emotional resilience. Every step required consideration, for the slightest miscalculation could undo months of careful planning and bring the shadow of capture uncomfortably close. Night continued to serve as both a shield and a test. The cover of darkness allowed them to traverse paths that would have been impossible during daylight, yet it demanded heightened awareness. Sounds that might have been negligible in the day took on significance. The whisper of wind through branches, the splash of water in a distant stream, or the muted footsteps of another traveler could signal either opportunity or danger. They developed a system of silent communication that relied on subtle gestures and glances, a shared language of urgency and caution. This nonverbal coordination was essential, as any noise could betray their presence and undo the careful concealment they had mastered. Physical hardship persisted with unrelenting pressure. Long hours of travel, often over uneven and treacherous terrain, sapped strength and challenged endurance. Hunger pressed constantly, forcing reliance on whatever could be found: wild berries, edible plants, and occasional small game. Rivers and streams provided water but carried the danger of leaving tracks or revealing their location. Each obstacle demanded creative solutions, whether in constructing temporary shelters from natural materials, using makeshift tools to cross difficult terrain, or improvising methods to obtain food and maintain energy. The success of each solution reinforced their confidence and strengthened the practical skills necessary for survival. Psychological strain was equally taxing. The constant threat of capture, the uncertainty of allies' intentions, and the ever-present fear of betrayal pressed heavily on both. Sleep was irregular and often shallow, leaving them fatigued yet forced to remain alert. Anxiety was intertwined with determination, each step forward requiring a balance between fear and resolve. They learned to compartmentalize emotions, channeling stress into focus and vigilance. This mental discipline became as vital to their survival as physical strength, reinforcing the need for both endurance and adaptive thinking in the face of persistent danger. Interactions with others remained fraught with complexity. The occasional safe haven offered by abolitionists, freedmen, or sympathetic townspeople provided respite and resources, yet these encounters were always approached with cautious calculation. The young woman honed her ability to mask her identity, altering speech, dress, and demeanor to avoid detection, while the young man relied on his experience to assess trustworthiness and potential risk. Every decision to engage, even briefly, involved weighing the immediate benefits against potential long-term consequences, a constant mental exercise that required attention to detail, intuition, and patience. Weather added further layers of challenge. Sudden storms transformed paths into quagmires, rain increased the risk of exposure, and heat and cold tested the limits of endurance. They learned to anticipate shifts in the environment, reading cloud formations, wind patterns, and animal behavior to prepare for sudden changes. Mastery of these cues became essential, turning natural observations into actionable knowledge that could determine the success or failure of a day's travel. Their ability to adapt to environmental conditions was not only practical but psychologically empowering, offering a sense of agency in a journey otherwise dominated by uncertainty. The bond between them grew ever stronger, forged under the pressures of shared adversity. Reliance on one another for guidance, protection, and emotional support was essential. They developed an intuitive understanding, anticipating each other's thoughts, needs, and actions, creating a fluid coordination that enhanced safety and efficiency. Trust was absolute, as hesitation or miscommunication could have fatal consequences. This partnership became a source of resilience, offering both practical benefits for survival and emotional sustenance in the face of relentless stress. The presence of pursuers was a constant shadow, shaping strategy and movement. Notices and descriptions of them had circulated widely, and bounty hunters were vigilant in their search. This relentless threat required strategic planning, misdirection, and acute observation. The fugitives developed methods to anticipate search patterns, avoid predictable routes and conceal traces of their passage. Each successful evasion not only ensured safety but also reinforced their confidence, sharpening instincts and honing their ability to predict human behavior. They became increasingly adept at integrating observation, analysis and action into a seamless survival strategy. Every challenge, whether environmental, physical, or psychological, contributed to their growing competence and resilience. They became increasingly skilled at assessing risk, improvising solutions and navigating both natural and human obstacles. The young woman's growth was remarkable. She transformed from a sheltered child of privilege into a resourceful, determined individual capable of critical thinking under pressure. The young man's guidance and experience were invaluable, but her adaptability and courage proved equally vital to their continued survival. Together, their complementary strengths formed a partnership that was inseparable from their progress toward freedom. The concept of liberty evolved from abstraction to tangible reality as they drew closer to the North. Freedom was measured in the ability to make independent choices, to act without fear of immediate capture, and to traverse the landscape under their own agency. Each step forward, each day survived without detection, brought them closer to the realization of autonomy and self-determination. The hardships endured heightened their awareness of freedom's value and fragility, reinforcing the importance of vigilance, resilience, and perseverance. Their relationship was both practical and deeply emotional, a vital component of survival. Communication, trust, and cooperation allowed them to respond to threats quickly and efficiently, anticipating one another's reactions, compensating for weaknesses, and sharing the burden of fear and responsibility created a partnership that was as functional as it was intimate. This collaboration provided strength and reassurance, illustrating the indispensable role of human connection in enduring adversity. The bond that had begun under circumstances of necessity evolved into a profound mutual reliance, where each drew courage and determination from the other. Navigation became a continual exercise in observation and strategic planning. Rivers, forests, hills, and open fields each required unique approaches. They learned to use the environment to their advantage, seeking concealment, avoiding predictable routes, and creating misdirection when necessary. Mastery of these elements was inseparable from their progress, emphasizing that survival was not only a matter of physical endurance, but also a sophisticated understanding of the world around them. The journey demanded intelligence, intuition, and constant adaptation, shaping them into highly perceptive and resourceful individuals. Through relentless challenges, their understanding of freedom and survival matured. It was no longer merely the absence of captivity but a series of deliberate actions, informed choices, and continuous adaptation. Each decision reinforced autonomy, each successful evasion strengthened confidence, and each obstacle overcome deepened resilience. The hardships they faced were formative, teaching lessons in courage, strategy, and mutual reliance that were as valuable as the freedom they sought. After 6 grueling months of relentless pursuit, sleepless nights, and constant fear, the plantation daughter and her companion finally crossed into the Northern Territories, where the law no longer recognized the chains that had bound him. Every mile they traveled, every obstacle overcome, had been a testament to their courage, resourcefulness, and unbreakable bond. The forests and rivers that had been both sanctuary and trial now lay behind them, witnesses to their resilience, while the distant towns and settlements whispered of hope rather than danger. The weight of their journey pressed upon them even in freedom. Memories of the plantation, of the family they had left and the life they had fled, lingered with bittersweet clarity. Yet, for the first time, they could breathe without immediate fear, choose their path, and envision a life shaped by their own will. The young woman's transformation from sheltered privilege to fearless determination was mirrored in the young man's journey from oppression to self-possession. Together, they had rewritten the boundaries imposed by society, claiming autonomy that no law or master could revoke. Word of their successful flight spread quietly through abolitionist networks, becoming a symbol of defiance and hope. They were no longer merely fugitives. They had become living proof that courage, trust, and strategic persistence could overcome even the harshest systems of oppression. Their story would inspire others, not only as an account of daring escape, but as a lesson in the power of human resilience, the unbreakable strength of partnership, and the transformative potential of freedom. As they looked northward toward open landscapes and new communities, the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. The months of fear, hunger, and uncertainty faded into the past, leaving behind a profound understanding of life, liberty, and the value of shared strength. In that moment, standing together, they felt the full weight and the full exhilaration of freedom, hard-won, deeply cherished, and infinitely precious. The journey had ended, but its lessons of vigilance, courage, adaptation, and unshakable trust would remain with them forever. And though the past could never be erased, they had proven that even in the darkest times,
Human will and connection could carve a path to light, leaving a story that would echo far beyond their own lives, a testament to the enduring power of hope and freedom.